Hello, Year 5. I'm back. Now, you and me, we've got a whole lot of history to get through today. Now, here's a question for you before we start. Would you rather have the Black Death or have to listen to One Direction? I know which one I'd choose. That was a no-brainer, wasn't it? Key question for this week, though. The Black Death. Was it just a disease? Now, what we mean by that is we're going to look at some of the medieval beliefs, or the beliefs of the people around the time, about what the Black Death actually was. Whether, obviously, there's the fact that it was an illness, but some people believe that it was more than that. It wasn't just the physical illness, and we're going to look into that in a bit more detail this lesson. So, learn objectives for today: to recall plague symptoms and treatments. Now, you looked with Mr. Turnbull last week at some of the plague symptoms, so the signs of the disease, how people suffered from it. I've seen some of the work that he did, actually, some really good work from a lot of people. A few names we're going to pick out. Alexis did some really good work in the different types of the plague, because there were 3 types of plague that people suffered from, actually. Toby did some really good research as well, so well done, Toby. And I really like how Stephen had presented his work. So we're keeping an eye out for your assignments today and seeing who's producing some really good work. So that was looking at those plague symptoms. That's what you were focusing on those. But we'll look at the treatments as well, how people treated those symptoms, and how they thought they could cure the disease. Then we'll start to look at those beliefs, so what people believed about the plague, so going beyond the treatments and actually, the origins of the Black Death, where it came from, why it came to this country, what people believed about that. And then we'll start to look at appraising the beliefs, so what were the reasons behind those beliefs? Why did people think the way they did? Quick question then. This was a word that Mr. Turnbull used last week in his lesson, trepanning. What does it mean? Pause the video, see if you can remember. And it is, of course, the act of scraping or drilling a hole into the human skull. Now, if you look at the picture there, the man having his skull drilled or scraped looks absolutely thrilled to be there, doesn't he? Goodness me, no thanks, Doc. You can just imagine what that man on the right is saying. So, are you sure this is going to work, Doc? The doctor's saying, well, of course. This is a classic cure. Classic cure. Just get a hole in your head, you'll be all right tomorrow. No problem. Some more key vocabulary there in this glossary, so you can come back to this slide to refer to some of these words here if you need further explanation. So some other vocabulary that you might want to use in today's lesson. Now, when we think about the Black Death at the moment, it's actually quite an appropriate topic, isn't it? In lots of parallels to today. Now, this looks familiar to many of you, I'm sure. Some of the slogans that the government are using at the moment: hands, face, and space. Now, just have a pause for a moment. Think, what might this have looked like in medieval times? What do you think the government would have done in those days? If you can, see if you can come up with your own idea of a poster or a slogan that could have been used. I'll show you my one in a second. Now, the hands, face, space does, of course, mean wash your hands, cover your face, and make space. And we're so well versed in those things that we know exactly what they mean. But of course, these things weren't even considered really in medieval times. So let's think about what they might have said instead. Now, I've gone for blood, snake, taste. Blood, snake, taste. It's got a certain ring to it, do you think? So what does each of those mean? Well, the first one, blood. Let leeches suck out the bad blood. common treatment, not just for the plague but for other illnesses in medieval times, was to have leeches placed on the skin. Now, this was a common treatment, like I say, but it was something that not everybody could afford. It was actually quite expensive. There was often a gentleman would come to the town with his leeches, and the people who could afford it, they would pay for the treatment. They would pay to have the leeches placed on their skin, and they believed that it would suck out the disease in the bad blood that carried the disease. So, as I say, not just the plague, but any for a range of other illnesses as well. It's painless, actually, as well. It sounds quite gruesome, but it is it's actually a painless treatment largely. And the next one, snake. Very, very unusual treatment, this one. I suppose they all are, but if you could get your hands on a snake, not many snakes around these parts, we know. Not many species are native to Britain. But if you could get your hands on a snake, hopefully not a live one, then you could chop it up and rub it on your boils. How does that sound? I'd rather go for soda creme, I think, or something else, personally. But, hey, each to their own. And finally, taste. Now, another treatment, or believed cure for the plague, was to drink urine. Drink somebody's or your own wee. In fact, we talked about paying for leeches to be placed on your skin. You could actually pay to acquire the urine of somebody who was not infected, so somebody who did not have the plague. They could sell you their urine, as it was believed that if you drank the urine of somebody who wasn't infected, that could help you with your own suffering and could ease your symptoms. And doctors, in fact, occasionally tasted the patient's wee as a way of diagnosing them. Again, not something that I would enjoy personally. Now, we know loads of gruesome things. Some things that we look back might be quite funny nowadays when we think about them, but at the time, that was what people believed. Now, in terms of what happened during the plague, you've had a few lessons on this already, some information that you would have already covered. And as we said, there wasn't actually a cure that was known because, well, it wasn't really well understood. So there were all these treatments that people tried, but of course, they were not successful. Whole communities, villages, towns were wiped out because it spread so quickly through the communities. The plague began in Britain in a fairly poor area in London and spread outwards from there. And actually, people died within days of becoming infected. Could be 1 to 2 days, as little as that. Different ways that they suffered. I know you covered that last week as well, but pain, fevers, and infected swellings on their bodies. We said there was no known cure. There were lots of strange alternative ways to avoid being infected. One of the beliefs was that you could hold a small bunch of flowers or herbs under your nose, and that would stop you getting the plague, because you would have nice smelling things under your nose that would keep away the bad smells, and people believe that the bad smells caused the plague. Drinking fine wines was another possible treatment. Eating toads. Another one was to have a bath in milk, which people believe would prevent them from becoming ill. I mentioned the drinking the urine before. Some people actually bathed in urine as well. Again, the less said about that one, the better. And there's even more things that they tried. So we've mentioned quite a few already, but the first one, well, we've mentioned the snake, but you could rub onions or herbs, or the snake, on the boils, or even take a chicken or a pigeon and rub it over your body. What people do, they would buy chicken, kill it, and pluck off all the feathers and then rub it over their bodies in the belief that it would cure them. Could drink vinegar, eat arsenic or mercury, which would be poisonous. So it might be a blessing in that it might be the poison that kills you rather than the plague itself. And 10-year-old treacle, if you've got a tin of that lying about. We talked about the nice smelling flowers or herbs as a way of avoiding the plague because of the smells. Well, some people believe that actually it was better to sit in the sewer to avoid getting the plague. Of course, these people were doubly in trouble because not only were they in the sewers where the rats may have been breeding, and so they were risking themselves, putting themselves at greater risk of infection. They were, of course, sitting in a sewer, which is extremely unpleasant. We talked about the doctors tasting the urine, whipping oneself, so taking a whip and whipping yourself. We're going to look at that in more detail, that form of treatment, and bursting the buboes, those horrible lumps. That was one way that people believed that they could cure themselves. Of course, like in the research that Alexis had done, it found that actually you could cause yourself greater harm because you could then get an infection of the blood, which would only increase your chances of dying from the plague. And just a little bit of extra information here is a nice link here to something you may know already. The nursery rhyme Ring a Ring of Roses is actually a rhyme about the Great Plague. As you can see there, the Ring of Roses refers to the red spots. That was one of the symptoms. And the Pocket Full of Posies, we talked about those flowers, the nice smells, to keep away the bad smells. A tissue, that is the sneezing, which affected people as the illness got worse. And then the final line, we all fall down, the people dying from the plague. You can impress your grown-ups with that knowledge there about the nursery rhyme. There's some other useful links here that you may wish to use when you come to complete your tasks. We've got an animated video with more information about the Black Death, the first one. There's some further video clips, lots of information. There's a bit of a quiz there as well in the second link. And the final link has a timeline of events of the Black Death, so that might be worth looking into as well. So, thinking about that key question, was it just a disease? Well, not what some people thought. Now, we talked about the doctors didn't really know much about the plague at all, how to treat it, or even what caused it. And these are some of the beliefs, some of the things that they thought were what caused the plague. So, the movement of the planets, a punishment from God, bad smells, enemies who had poisoned the wells, the drinking water, the act of staring at somebody, staring at a victim who had the plague, wearing pointed shoes, or allowing strangers to visit the village or town. So these are all things that people believed brought the plague upon them. Now, what do you think about those? Do any of them sound reasonable at all? Now, we think that we would say a lot of those are just superstitious. They sound quite amusing or strange to us. But let's think about at the time. You know, technology was non-existent. People relied on what they could see or what they were told. So do we think these are based on fact, or is it just a case of what people believed or guessed? And do any of those causes of the Black Death seem realistic to you? Or do they all sound unrealistic? Take a minute then to think about those beliefs. Which ones are realistic, which ones might have an element of truth, which ones are just superstition. And take a minute now to discuss what your thoughts are. Now look a bit more carefully at this final one here, strangers visiting the village. Now, this wasn't a cause of the plague, but it did allow the plague to spread. So it wasn't what caused the plague initially. We've covered that already. We know how the disease spread to England and then how it was transmitted to humans. However, strangers visiting, so people moving from one town to another, to one village, we can see how that would have enabled the plague to spread, but it wasn't the cause of the plague itself. And we know from our current restrictions, our lockdowns as well, during the COVID pandemic, exactly you can see why that was the case. So villages that were more remote and didn't have people visiting were able to stay free of the plague. It's one of the reasons that Scotland did not suffer from the Black Death, because people did not transmit the plague up to over the Scottish border. We're going to take a bit more time as well to look at this one I've highlighted in green, the fact that the plague was a punishment from God. Now we have to remember that medieval society was very religious, and it was almost natural for them to start thinking about God and what his role in this was. Let's have a look in more detail about that now. So have a look at this picture here, this image. What do you think it shows? And that word there at the top is pronounced flagellants. So study the image carefully. So the image there depicted flagellants. So they were religious followers who would whip themselves. I mentioned that earlier, people whipping themselves as a treatment. And they believed that if they punished themselves by whipping themselves, this would cause God to show mercy towards them and therefore not strike them down with the Black Death. And they believed that God was responsible for spreading the plague to people who had sinned, to people who had done wrong. So they believed that if they punished themselves, if they accounted or atoned for their sins, that God would show mercy and not strike them with the plague. And they would actually go from town to town or from village to village and head straight for the church, and the bells would ring to announce the people, the community, that the flagellants had arrived. And they had to follow some very strict rules. We've got 3. The number of times the flagellation would take place each day. So twice in the daytime and once in the evening. 33 was the number of days that this lasted. And the reason they chose this number was because Jesus was 33 when he's believed to have been crucified. So we've got 33 days, 3 times a day. You do the maths. But this had to total 8 hours. So over those 33 days, the whipping would have to have occurred for at least 8 hours. And finally, 4 pence. So not much in today's money, but this is how much they were expected to pay towards their food each day as they moved from town to town. Now they also had to avoid speaking, avoid shaving, bathing or changing their clothes, and they were only allowed to sleep on straw. As I said, these people believed that by following these rules they could avoid getting the plague. If you want to know more about the flagellants, there are some additional resources attached to the assignment on Teams. and on the website as well. So there's 2 documents there, an information text and an eyewitness account as well. Very useful resources to read through. So, thinking back to the key question then, the Black Death, was it just a disease? Or was it more? Was it a curse because you wore your pointy shoes? I knew I shouldn't have worn those pointy shoes, and now look what's happened. I've got buboes all over the body. Or was it a punishment from God? Oh God, I know I've done wrong. Oh, how I have sinned. I better start whipping myself for 8 hours over the next few weeks. Or were those just superstition? Was it just a disease? If you remember back to the learn objectives that we covered at the start of the lesson, we're going to go through the tasks that match those now. So this first task is going to recap some of you learned from last week. So can you list all of the plague symptoms that you can remember? And then following that, which different treatments can you recall? We've gone through lots of them in this video lesson. So which different treatments can you recall? Now you could present your work as a list, or you can create a table with 2 columns, or you could do a mind map with symptoms in the middle, with all the different symptoms surrounding it, likewise with the treatments, or you could do it as a piece of writing. It's your choice how you want to present that work. If you are completing the red task to outline medieval beliefs about the plague, so give an outline of what people believed. So what did they believe about the plague in terms of its causes, how it spread and how it should be treated? If you look at the example below there, belief was that it was a punishment from God. What people did, flagellation, they whipped themselves. You can obviously give an explanation of that. And what it led to, well, with all this sharp whip you were using 3 times a day, it would naturally cause cuts, bruises, open wounds, and actually that could increase your risk of infection. As we know nowadays, that open cuts and sores can actually be a way of bacteria getting into the body, so it actually put you at higher risk of infection. So you can present your work as a table, again with 3 different columns, or you could do a flow chart similar to what we've got above. And finally then, if you're going to use this task to appraise the beliefs about the plague, so not to just outline but to appraise them. So why did people hold these beliefs? What do people believe about the plague? Its causes, how it spread, how it should be treated, and what were the reasons behind these beliefs? So we've got again below, belief, punishment from God. What was the reason? Well, firstly, people didn't have a very good understanding of disease and how it spread, what the causes were. And the very religious society at the time, they were all taught to believe that sins would be punished by God. So lots of people believed that this was a sign that God was unhappy with them. So again, you could present your work as a table, or you could write a paragraph about each of those beliefs. Now, as always, you can submit your work to the assignment on Teams, or you can email it to year5@ssjs.co.uk. There's a little challenge as well if you want to come up with a bit of an alternative plague remedies, so cures or treatments. Now, we've heard of lots of different ones. Maybe you want to come up with your own wacky ideas. See what you can come up with for that. Rubbing a chicken all over yourself, remember, was one of them. So can you come up with something similar, perhaps? Or can you come up with a modern alternative? Something like holding an iPhone strapped to each armpit would cure you of the disease. So put a modern twist on them. Or can you maybe come and try and come up with a believable one? So if you eat a concoction of grass, poisonous frog, and some other ingredients, perhaps, can you see if you can come up with maybe a more believable plague remedy? And if you really want to gross out your grown-ups at home, you can make your own exploding Bumbo. Now, this is pretty gruesome. So you've got your ingredients that you need below there. And we'll see on the next slide the directions for what you need to do. Looks a bit gross when you think about what it's meant to represent, but on the other hand, a jam and custard donut sounds good to me. Certainly sounds a lot better than some of those plague treatments, doesn't it? Alright, Year 5, looking forward to seeing your work. Bye for now.